I call Carmel Cipollone.
Thank you very much, Mr Chair. I just want to discuss the commencement date of this bill and point out that actually the decision to fund this package was made on the 21st of May 2015, Budget Day. That's when the announcement was made. And I guess our concern is that actually the commencement of this bill won't be until the 1st of April 2016. And what we're all aware of in the House is that with 305,000 children living in poverty, there was a very real immediate need to address that poverty. With 60% of the 305,000 children living in poverty being from beneficiary homes, the government had a very real opportunity to move this through quickly and to make a very small but nonetheless a difference in the lives of those children. So we're disappointed with the commencement date. We're particularly disappointed with the commencement date given that just through urgency a couple of weeks ago we had the government pushing through the commencement of benefits bill, which saw a number of people deprived of the opportunity to make claims given that they were underpaid because of some technical error over the last 17 years, Mr Chair. So it's disappointing that the government uses urgency in those situations, but here we have a very real need. We have 305,000 children living in poverty, 181,000 of them living in beneficiary homes, and yet the government didn't see it as necessary to try and push this through any faster. So now we wait until April the 1st, 2016, and it's an unnecessary delay because you wouldn't have any opposition from any party in this House if you decided to move the commencement date of this bill forward. So, Mr Chair, that's a concern that I wanted to express. In fact, I want to know from the Minister if the Minister would consider actually amending the commencement date to bring it forward earlier so that these families may have a little bit more money in their pocket particularly around the kind of Christmas period, January, February, when the kids go back to school. Would the Minister consider shifting the commencement date of this bill? Mr Chair, the title of this bill is the Support for Children in Hardship Act 2015, and I'm just going to put it out there right now and say, given that it does very little to address the needs of the 305,000 children living in poverty, that perhaps a better title for this bill would have been Supporting a Few Children in Hardship Bill, Mr Chair. And Mr Chair, I say that because the government decided they wanted to spend $250 million per year for a package that would make them appear that they are addressing the issue of child poverty, but they picked a measurement of material hardship that really suited their half-baked approach. And Mr Chair, we see that the government selected measure that would give them a figure of between 60,000 and 100,000, not the household income measure that has been frequently reported in the past, the latest of which shows the number of children in poverty has increased to 305,000, meant that they were choosing the lowest possible figure in terms of estimates around children in poverty, which has also meant that they will only be assisting at the very most 18,000 families with children, and that's a smidgen of the 305,000 that we know of. And I want to say that it's really disappointing actually to hear national MPs like the chair of the Social Services Select Committee, Alfred Ngaro, use that 100,000 figure in terms of when he was referring to children living in poverty, because I'm sure that member, like so many other members in the House, know that that is a major understatement and he's doing a disservice to those children and those families that are living in poverty. Mr Chair, now, so how much extra do those 18,000 families get? Well, actually, they get $23.10 per family a week. And I want to just refer back to what my colleague Stu was saying. and this is why I think it should be support for a few children in hardship bill, that actually that amount of money is per family. It's not per child in those families. So it does disadvantage those families with more children. It does mean that that small amount of money is going to have to be stretched across these families and make it much more difficult for them to get any benefit out of it, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair?
Carmel Cipollone.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I want to refer back to the title, so support for a few children in hardship, and I also want to maybe relabel this support for a few children in hardship bill, and what else can I call it? Well, actually, no, I'm going to call it lack of support for the parents of these children in hardship bill, Mr. Chair, because there are measures that this government have put through that we don't support in this bill. We only have to support this bill. Well, we're forced to support this bill because these families are so hard up, Mr. Chair, that the $25, even though a little bit, is going to be something that will go into their pockets. But what we're concerned about is, in terms of the lack of support for the parents of these children in hardship bill, is that we see a government that is pushing through legislation that has no evidence base. We have the age where work obligations kick in going from 5 to 3, despite the fact there's no evidence to support that will see these families better off. In fact, when I put PQs through to the Ministry of Social Development to ask them what evidence they had collected to support the measures in this bill, they said over the last 2 years, nothing. No evidence whatsoever. And when we started to look for evidence to see what happens when you impose these types of work obligations on families, what we found is that families can actually be worse off. Families can actually be worse off because what you end up doing is pushing parents out into the lowest paid jobs, and they can be worse off working than what they actually were on a benefit. And that is in no way supporting the children in hardship that this government say that they're supporting. Mr. Chair, we have major reservations about extending the work obligations from 15 to 20 hours. And our reason for that is because currently we know that our parents have access, or the parents of these children have access to 20 hours free ECE, but there's also travel time that needs to be taken into consideration. The government would have us believe that they could access childcare subsidy on top of that, which would help with the additional hours, which would be travel time in terms of picking up and dropping off their children. But we've seen evidence this year that shows that once off benefit, parents are less likely to access the child subsidy that they may be entitled to access. And in fact, I've seen letters to parents where they've been told, no, you're not eligible for childcare subsidy because you're able to access 20 hours free. Makes absolutely no sense, but I've seen it in black and white. So we've got concerns for the parents of these children living in hardship because they're actually going to be stretched more, and it may actually impact on their ability to be able to look after their children. So, as I said before, renaming it lack of support for the parents and caregivers of these children living in hardship bill, I just want to point out that the national government voted against an SOP that I put up that would have put study alongside work obligations so that actually these parents would be supported to go into part-time study or take up part-time work. And the reason that makes sense to us, and I'm sure it makes sense to the general public as well, is that actually we don't just want to be pushing out the parents or caregivers of these children living in hardship into minimum wage jobs. Where we can, we actually want to be providing them with the opportunity to upskill, train, potentially increase their earning capacity, potentially increase their options in terms of getting into more secure work when they go out into the workforce. But unfortunately, National, so short-sighted, hasn't supported that SOP. And in fact, In Select Committee, we had national members of the Select Committee saying, well, they can get a student allowance. They can only get a student allowance if they're studying full-time, and that's 32 hours or more. And so there is no opportunity here now for these parents to be able to access part-time study, so let's say 20 hours to 31 hours, and in some instances, that is all that would be practical, perhaps because of the needs of their children, perhaps because of the number of their children, but it would have made sense that the national government would have supported that provision. And as I said, it just goes to show that in many ways this bill should be named lack of support for the parents and caregivers of these children living in hardship. So we are supporting this bill because of the $25 increase, but we have major reservations which might cause us to rename this bill.
Call Chris Hipkins.